Wake up, everybody. This is the History You Forgot podcast, the podcast where three teachers with about 90 years of teaching experience try to catch you up on the stuff that you probably slept through when you were younger. And today, we're tackling a big era, the era of Jackson in America. And get ready, here it comes.
I'm Jason Jones, history teacher, teaching world history and geography.
And I'm Jeff Breedlove. I focus mostly on European and world history with a little bit of economics.
And I'm Jason Schmoida, and I teach a lot of U.S. history, AP U.S. history, and some international relations and election stuff as well.
So a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything. Between the three of us, I think
we're called Jack of all trades.
That's
If you want to actually call it out. So I think you alluded to it, right? We are going to open up some pretty broad topics today, right? We're going to do a little bit larger period of time, maybe about a 50-year span. And content-wise, last time we saw you guys, right, it was all about Napoleon, which his reign ended in 1815, right, which we'll talk about today, the Congress of Vienna. We dropped a little kind of vanity project in there last time about the history repeating itself, but we're going to go ahead and pick up content, sort of go from about 1815 to like 1850, and we're going to try to mirror U.S. and European events that eventually sort of set the stage in the U.S. for the Civil War, and in Europe for the revolutions of 1848 and the rise of Germany and Italy and things like that. So I think we've got our work cut out for us, but it's going to be a little bit of a broad brush, and hopefully we'll keep you guys interested and remind you what you should have paid attention to the first time around. So let's go. Mr. Schmoida, you want to introduce the drink?
Let's introduce the drink. This is a simple one today. One of the key characters, especially from American history around this time period, was Andrew Jackson. And I think we all know Andrew Jackson liked to have a little drink, but I looked it up. I was trying to figure it out. I was like, okay, I know he was a big whiskey guy, right, from Tennessee. And literally, Andrew Jackson sipped Tennessee whiskey. And that was what it said. Everywhere I went, that's what it said. I even went back to like the American Lion, right? That full, I was just trying to find anything in there about he sipped Tennessee whiskey. So we're sipping Tennessee whiskey. Yep. Cheers.
Cheers, gents. All right. To episode 6.
And by the way, this is a Bibb and Tucker Tennessee whiskey, 6-year. And it is good.
It's very good.
It is good. So
it was a good buy, Mr. K.
Yes,
well done.
Thank you.
if the maker of Bibb and Tucker's out there, nice work.
Yeah. Nice plug. That's right. Always looking for a plug.
Absolutely. So I was going to kind of pick this up and start quick summary of the War of 1812, because that led to kind of a groundswell of nationalism in the United States. And that's kind of the beginning of our discussion on this all. We talked about isms. I think in the last episode, we started this idea of introducing an ism, and nationalism is just like forefront again. So if we're going to do another one, we'll repeat it, but listen for some others. We got a few other terms that are going to pop up throughout.
There'll be a quiz at the end.
So War of 1812 was one of the dumbest wars in American history. And if you dig into it, you'd find that it didn't need to begin, and it ended with we thought we won, which is the best part of it all, right? You might remember that we tried to invade Canada again and failed. You might even remember that no one won the war. The treaty was a treaty where no side gained or lost anything, but yet we think we won because 2 weeks after the treaty was signed, Andrew Jackson won a big battle at the Battle of New Orleans, and everybody cheered about it. It's very strange, right? It's a very strange war.
It's
just weird.
I'm just listening because I don't remember it either. This is one I must have slept through.
Well, the key to it is this. We felt really good about ourselves after that. And we started to identify a little bit more as Americans for the longest time. Virginians would still call themselves Virginians, right? And people say it was the War of 1812 and that post-war elation, the sense that we'd won a second war against the British that made everybody excited. But what it began to do is it began to knit the states together in a way that we felt like we were becoming a nation. What's strange about it, and this is the kind of the weird factor, is that while we were growing in national identity, you also were seeing some serious cultural and growth identity differences in the northern states, the southern states, and now these new emerging western states, because we're rapidly creating new western states and they're a little bit different, right? There's a little bit of industry in the West. There's a little bit of agriculture. There's a real independent streak amongst the people that live in those Western states. And between the North and the South and the West, depending upon where you live, you've got a very different idea of what it means to be American and how to celebrate that. And I think that's really the beginning of a lot of stories for us. So,
hit it.
Mr. Schmoida, one thing I always think about with the Revolutionary War and then the War of 1812 is, what if the British would have just kind of gone home for a year or two and just kind of got back on their feet and got, coordinated and came right back across? Because at that time, if you remember from a couple episodes ago, we talked about the Articles of Confederation and how really the United States was a loose confederation of states, and could they have handled that? But I'm not supposed to talk about that. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
Connection
but it's interesting, right?
And remind me, Shmoyda, that War of 1812 is White House is burned.
Yeah.
And Star Spangled Banner.
Star Spangled Banner.
Okay, so all those sort of like
Francis
cultural
Scott Key.
touchstones.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'm
The
sorry.
war that nobody knows much about, but you've got a few little nuggets like that. Yeah.
Right. Like
sure.
Well,
White House
so
is burned.
in Europe, we're talking the end of the Napoleonic era. Napoleon is going to lose power officially in 1815. The Congress of Vienna is the second time that he is defeated, technically. And it's also the second time that he has really shown an unbelievable amount of respect.
Absolutely.
Here's a guy who was exiled both times that he was defeated. He could have been imprisoned. He could have been put to death.
Right. Absolutely.
He had treated the entirety of the continent of Europe horribly, tried to force them to be French, but the leaders respected him and they exiled him.
Well, I think it goes to that whole idea too, that if you want to sort of legitimize your own new power as a monarch or leading emperor or whatever it is, you can't put one of them down, right? You have to keep that idea going, right?
Yeah. So if you guys remember from a couple episodes ago, we talked about the Napoleonic Code, and that was the French trying to force everybody else to be French, to put it plainly. So the nationalism, the belief that we're the best, right, is really to the forefront in European countries. And you've got really the restoration of the original monarchs or rulers, with a little bit of a catch, Mr. Breedlove, that we're not going to give them ultimate power anymore. It's going to be a constitutional monarchy.
Yes, it's the end of the absolutist kind of concept in most places. There's still going to be Russia, still going to be pretty absolutist in some of the like Austrian states. But for the most part, I mean, there's constitutions now as a result of the revolution, both American and French.
Parliaments or Congress.
There's all sorts of, ideas of representation, whatever that looks like. But I also think, as I'm just kind of spinning this in my brain, when Mr. Schmoyda said, in America, right, the 50 states are coming together to create one national identity. I think, ironically, right, in the Congress of Vienna, we end up splitting into like independent nation states, each with their own sort of reborn nationalism, right? I mean, that legacy of Napoleon is, if you had been invaded by Napoleon, you were Spanish or Dutch or anything, or that it brought back those, like, we don't want to be French. We want to be German or Spanish or Italian. So I think it gives Europe more of a multinational concept versus the one, right? Which I think, just kind of interesting. But same thing.
Well, although the parallel to that would be our northern, southern, and western contingents, our regional or sectional issues there. It could be that's a little similar. We have nationalism, but we also have that separation.
I don't think that whole secession separation thing is a little different. I mean, I don't think people saw themselves as, European.
No, not at all. But there's a little flavor there.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I think, Jones, isn't it? There's also like a lot of the reborn monarchs, right? Were not only Constitution, but there's a purpose to bringing back that conservative kind of power.
Yeah, you had the French Revolution, which was very chaotic and very out of control. Right. And then you've got Napoleon, who comes in and names himself all these different titles, right? Eventually Emperor of France.
But he is elected.
Yeah, well, technically, that's what he claims, right? But then, so because of the chaos, right, people want something to feel normal, right? Back to something they understand.
Right.
That makes sense.
Which I think then brings back the monarchs. They at least know who's in charge, recognizable face kind of thing.
Yep.
But
so in the United States, what comes along with all of this is a sense of like the people have become empowered, right? A swell of kind of democratic values and hope that people can participate more. That's where Jackson fits right in. That's a perfect spot for him. In the United States, there's an election in 1824 in which John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson are the two primary candidates, and Jackson was winning. Henry Clay was in that as well, but Jackson was winning both the popular and the electoral vote. But the problem was no one got the majority of electoral vote. It's one of those elections where nobody gets the majority of the electoral vote. It goes to the House of Representatives. And there seemingly was a deal made, right? Where John Quincy Adams went to Henry Clay and said, Henry Clay, you are the
Speaker.
What speaker? Good Lord. Right. You're the Speaker of the House.
It's been a long day.
If you can bring me the election, I can get you the Secretary of State position. Back in those days, Secretary of State was a hop, skip, and a jump to the president. It seems like that's what happened because Henry Clay went to work. John Quincy Adams was given the election in the House of Representatives, and Andrew Jackson went off and called this the corrupt bargain. Right. So he went and toured the country. This was a fraudulent election. And said,
so it was messy. That doesn't sound familiar.
That doesn't sound familiar at all, right?
People calling it fraudulent?
Hey, we've had this before, right? We've had some weird elections, and we've had the accusation of fraud. That was a little fishy, to be honest with you. If that's a backroom deal in the House, the only problem is that the Constitution says that's the way it works, and if there's a little bit of a deal going on. But what it did is it created this massive mass appeal for Andrew Jackson. He was cheated. And he marched around the country and for 4 years campaigned. This is the beginning of the Democratic Party. Andrew Jackson was the first candidate and first president for the modern day Democratic Party. And so they separated from was at that time just one party. And the birth of the Democratic Party and the birth of Jackson as a very, I think, populist type leader, meaning he really appealed to the average common man. Jackson was really big on the common man. And in an era where we were growing, we were expanding, and we were nationalizing, the idea of the people gaining more power, and here comes a leader saying the common man should have more power. It was super powerful. It was very popular.
Yeah, and I think, immediately in my bell, right, it's that classic liberalism.
Right.
Right, the individual has rights, right? It's the legacy of Locke, right, from a couple episodes ago. But I think also, if I think about the liberalism, I think about the common man, right? That becomes sort of a universal, right? As we move into this, newly industrialized age.
Right. And in Europe, more people want the right to vote.
Right.
We've got the idea that laissez-faire government laissez-faire government hands off.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things like that where people feel like they have more rights and ability to control their own life.
Yeah, right.
Although, as we talked, Jeff, really in Europe anyway, the number of people that truly got the right to vote was minimal.
Horribly minimal. But then you also said something as I'm thinking about this, right, about touring the country and kind of getting the popular appeal, right, is I think that in Europe, at least in the US a little bit, with this growing industrialization, right, you've got cities now that become sort of focal points, right? There are more people living in cities
right,
as a result of industrialization. That's what the jobs are. So somebody can travel around, hit a big city, get a whole bunch of sort of, laborers, industrial workers, and then appeal to their sense of like, it's rigged, you're being kept out of it, right? You don't get to vote, but how do you have rights? But, just because you have rights doesn't make you equal.
Yeah, that was a big appeal of Andrew Jackson. Coming from a tradition, Jackson called himself a Jeffersonian. So Jackson liked to think of himself as in the same vein as Jefferson. We haven't really dove into that in this episode, in any episode.
Write it down.
We certainly could, right? When we get into breaking down political parties and the history there, we would. But Jefferson was a common man advocate. But Jefferson saw it as an agricultural thing.
Right.
Whereas Andrew Jackson that saw the growth of the cities and understood it, like this can be anyone from a basic laborer to a farmer, industrial worker, didn't matter. Common man meant common man. It didn't matter how much money you made. It didn't matter your status. And those are things that really fired the population up. Everybody wants to hate Jackson. And I understand why. We haven't gotten to the reasons to hate him.
We haven't gotten to him yet.
We haven't gotten to it. But the thing is, This is why people loved him, because he promised more
Interesting.
opportunities for more people, and this is what made him the hero.
Well, and think about how much society had changed. So many people had left the farm to come to the city.
Yeah,
The cities were growing very rapidly. The leadership in the cities couldn't keep up with all the needs of the people. You have people now who aren't growing their own food, so they have to buy it from somewhere,
Yeah.
right? And so you've got all these things. And remember, the worker might have been the most taken advantage of people in society.
Exploited.
Yeah, because you were sick. You couldn't be sick. You'd lose your job.
Right.
You get hurt on the job, you lose your job. And so
No protections.
no protection.
Right. Cities are death spots.
Yeah.
That they're horrible.
Right.
And I think that actually to combine those two, right? I find it ironic that in the US, right, this rise of the common man, this idea of a common man, isn't necessarily pushing back against like a legacy of feudalism or a legacy of a nobility, right? Like
right.
you would think that it would have kind of naturally come out of a constitution and a revolutionary war, but in Europe, I mean, clearly what has happened, it's been a shift of who has power from birthright nobility to elected officials, or at least monarchs who are checked by elected officials. So I think I just find it funny that they're on the same path,
Mhm.
right, in terms of the reaction, but it's against different things, which I
Yeah,
love. Yeah.
I think you're right.
I never thought about that.
Kind of starts to get into the meat and potatoes of this stuff, doesn't it?
God, I know I should have written something down.
Well, I mean, if we,
No, but I think it does. I think it sets up Jackson.
It does.
Right? I mean, in a perfect way. I didn't realize that he had lost. Again, I apologize. My U.S. history, right, is the.
I'm that way with you guys. So
I
yeah.
know. But I didn't realize that he had lost an election to a battle in the House
Yeah.
the first time. And then he used that to kind of build a groundswell.
Right.
So when he runs again in 28, then I'm
28.
assuming.
So yeah, so he won in 28. He won in 32. Served 2
like
terms.
by a landslide kind of thing. Like,
Both of them were pretty easy
Okay.
elections. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Both of them were pretty easy
I
elections.
didn't realize that either.
Yeah.
yeah,
So-
I just
Yeah.
I didn't remember.
I apologize to my U.S. history teacher.
Please don't apologize.
Right.
But he will give way to this. You know, we talk in U.S. history, and I think even the title of this episode is the era of Jackson, right? And when you label an era after a president, and that era is bigger than the 4 to 8 years that person served, you realize that means this person had a greater impact. And I like to think of Jackson as both being a symptom of this groundswell of popular sort of move towards more democratic values and withering away status as a power thing. But he also then became a catalyst for it and moved it forward to a great degree. States were already getting rid of monetary requirements to vote. States were already getting rid of land requirements to vote. Jackson was a proponent of it, and it just took off
Okay.
with him.
So by the time he was elected,
Mhm.
were there actually a pretty significant number of people who could
There
who
were.
could vote at least? Yeah.
The number of white men was growing
Right.
pretty seriously,
Right. Okay.
and
Right.
would continue to. And I think it's funny. I don't remember if I've said this in an episode yet, but I know I've said this in a conversation
you have.
recently where it's like, I don't think Andrew Jackson would love the idea that he began the trend of giving more people the right to vote, because he wouldn't have wanted women to get the right to vote. He was pretty adamantly opposed to that. He was pro-slavery. I mean, he was absolutely adamant about slavery. He was opposed. The man killed indigenous people, right, for like a
Right,
living.
right.
So there's no way
he's
he
a
would go
troublesome
there.
character on lots
He's-
of fronts.
He's problematic in a lot of ways,
Right.
talking about democracy, but at the same time, he was someone who propelled this
Isn't
in
that
a great
crazy?
way. Yeah, it is. It's very,
I mean,
it's
it's that
like
kind of-
ironic.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
the
it's-
Jefferson thing, right? I mean, how somebody who is so completely clearly about
Mhm.
building a new country can also be a slave owner. And
Right.
Mhm.
So was Andrew Jackson a land owning male with slaves?
At one point, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, did he
Um,
marry money like everybody else did back then?
You know, I don't remember. He was an attorney. He was an attorney,
Okay.
self-taught. He was an
Okay.
attorney.
He's
He's
an
obviously a military guy. He was here in
Right.
the War of 1812. Did a bunch of the raids of Indian in Florida, all kinds of stuff in there. So I don't know that he ever
Trail
owned-
of Tears. He was
Well, he was president and enacted policy that would sort of lead to
to that.
Okay.
yeah,
which is
which-
what you're talking about.
yeah.
right?
yeah.
Okay.
Which heck, I mean, might as well start getting into some of that, right?
Do
I mean,
it, hit it.
that's that
'Cause
Jacksonian
I'm just like
democracy idea, right? That-
fascinated. I'm like,
but so we've covered the concept of the common man. We've covered the idea of more people wanting rights. Universal white male suffrage. We've pretty much dealt with that. The thing about Jackson, and this is where if you've listened up to this point, you're like, well, why would people not like Jackson? Well, here it comes. Right?
Get out a pencil.
Here it comes. And it starts with the thing that separates sort of the Jacksonian common man theme from the Jeffersonian common man theme is that Jackson believed that he, as president, had his finger on the pulse of the common man. And as president, should be able to use every ounce of power he has and probably a little bit more to enact it. He and he alone knew how to fix the problems of the common man. And so when it came to the Supreme Court ordering that the people of Georgia stop interfering on native lands, that we had contracts to keep native lands separate, Jackson told the people of Georgia, never mind the Supreme Court. Just go on the land. It's not going to matter.
A little bit of a unitary executive.
Yeah. And that's one of many things.
Right.
Yeah, that's concerning when you decide that you have more power, the checks and balances that are in place, and you're just going to not pay attention to those.
Right. He did that. That would lead then to some legislation that literally, guys, the name of the legislation was the Indian Removal Act. It tells you what it did.
Mm-hmm.
It tells you the purpose. And there's a story, and it's one of those stories that you bring up and you hope it's true because it's interesting. But, Martin Van Buren was like chief of staff to Jackson, and Jackson promised the natives, if you just move west of the Mississippi, we'll never bother you as long as the grass grows and the sun shines. And Van Buren famously said to Jackson, he goes, what are we going to do if we move west of the Mississippi? He's like, we'll move again. Supposedly that was the conversation.
Right.
And it just sets up Native American policy for the United States in the future. So you're starting to get an idea of maybe why in the modern era, people don't see Jackson as a hero.
Well, that's the Trail of Tears, I think you were just saying, right?
And
is that what that is?
The Removal Act will eventually become the Trail of Tears once they start to force people off of the land.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a couple of reasons he's problematic.
Right.
Right off this.
We could go more, but we can keep going.
I knew he was problematic, but I don't think I realized how popular at the same time he was.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Yeah.
Definitely.
If you had to put some kind of parallel, anything, I can think of a couple of things. Great Britain is going to pass the Reform Act of 1832, so we get a little bit more legislation to let people vote. We're going to get the people beginning to protest against laws and legislation they don't like, right? Like the anti-corn laws, where farmers are being hurt by a tariff system, and now all of a sudden, instead of just sort of taking it, you got to take to the streets. I think the legacy of the American and French Revolution would be, if you don't like what's going on, you can change it. And so you would get these like mass protests, but then you get the response, like, was that Peterloo, right? You get the response where the government only has one response to it, which is like, crush it, people get hurt, right? Which then spins the ball again to like, well, they're seeing more protests.
Well, in the anti-corn laws, we're removing a tariff, correct?
Right,
because, and tariff is obviously a term we hear a lot today. And I think it's kind of important for people to understand what it is, right? When
just call it what it is.
It's a tax.
There we go.
Right. and it's a tax on the people that are buying the goods. So in this era, if England is buying, let's say, wheat, because bread is such a big part of everyone's diet from the Americas or some other country, the people that are bringing that wheat into the country are paying the tariff, then making the loaves of bread and then passing that on to us as we buy those loaves of bread. And the Anti-Corn Act was removing that tariff. The tariff was, the government puts it in place, they think, to protect the farmer.
Yes.
Right. And so anyway, you look at those kinds of things kind of backwards, right? Usually you're not trying to push for something that
something.
Well, and so if I can take this in a Jackson direction again,
we're just trying to throw a couple of little bones your way.
The tariff was certainly in his first term something that dragged him down. There was, you might be surprised to know, there was.
Okay, I'm sorry. What drags him down?
I'm getting ready to tell you.
Okay,
so there was some partisanship going on in the 1828 election, and the opponents of Jackson, the supporters of Jackson were hoping to embarrass John Quincy Adams. I won't get into too much detail here, but what they did is they passed a really high tariff, right? Jackson, being a Westerner / Southerner in his background, you would think not like a tariff to be high, but his supporters supported it anyway because they were hoping to embarrass John Quincy Adams. It's kind of weird. They were hoping he would veto it because he was from New England, and it had something to do with it hurting wool producers. Kind of a long story short, but John Quincy Adams said, well, if this is what the people want, and he signed it, and it became law. So when Jackson won in 1828, he was saddled with this large tariff. You would think this is easy. He's not going to like a big tariff. He's going to get rid of it, but he didn't, mainly because he was in a personal battle with some people, particularly his vice president, John C. Calhoun. And when John C. Calhoun was kind of in cahoots with some other Southern legislators to combat the tariff that they called the Tariff of Abominations, eventually Andrew Jackson kind of puts him proverbially like up against the wall and says, look, you need to figure this out, solve this problem. I'm kind of done messing with you. Calhoun says, you know what? I'm out of here. He resigned the vice presidency and he penned the South Carolina Exposition, which was a diatribe against the tariff and the national government and the power of the national government. Right. And so Jackson says, I will support the federal government in this case. Jackson's always been a states' rights guy, but he's like, hey, I'm the federal government.
There we go.
And if you're going against me, I'm against you, and takes this stance that surprises a lot of people for the tariff. Eventually, they come up with a compromise to bring the tariff down over a long period of time, but it really was a distraction throughout the entire first term of Andrew Jackson. So, like, right in line, we have pro-tariff, anti-tariff clashes, and he was, like, right in the middle of it.
Right in the middle of it. Well, I just wanted to back up just a second because we've been talking about, like, the Reform Act in Europe, where people are getting rights. And one thing that you and I have talked about, Mr. Breedlove, a couple of times is rights don't mean equality.
Right.
And so even though another portion of landowning white males in Europe got an opportunity to vote, that didn't mean that they were equal. And we've seen that throughout history, that you know, if you look at the United States, even, you know, with women getting the right to vote and with African Americans getting the right to vote, and different, they still were hampered by people who didn't want them to have the right to vote.
Right.
So
100%. Yeah, 100%. Same is true in the United States. As we gain the right to vote, we're still finding ways to sort of, you know, in different regions, prevent people from having too much power.
Yeah, two steps forward, one step back.
Two steps forward. That's probably the right way to say it. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think to piggyback on what you were just saying, right, as this lead up to either a Civil War or Jacksonian or even European sort of protest movement, what we're kind of going through, right, post these revolutions, American and French, are like ups and downs, right? People pushing the boundary, like, how much do we have in terms of rights? What rights are we able to, you know, exercise freely? And then, you know, you've got that sort of pushback of governments again going, well, you know, we can't let everybody have a seat at the table because then, you know, that kind of democracy is chaos, right? There still has to be limited,
right,
and keep the table small.
And the people with power never want to give up the power, right? So they
when it's the irony of, we are people collectively that are opposed to government, but if someone is in office supporting us, do every freaking thing you can for us. Like the supporters of Jackson were not pro-federal government, but all of a sudden he was the president and he was saying, I'm going to wield power for you. And they're like, hell yeah, do it.
Yeah, everybody wants to sit at the table. Right. I mean, if you have a chance,
if it works for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, which I think is always ironic, right? Like, I used to always say that as you expand either the franchise or you expand, you know, ability to own a business or bank laws or whatever, the people who are given that access, right, that they're the ones who all of a sudden are all in, right? They're huge supporters or whatever it is. And then they will turn against those who are still without.
Yeah, wanting access.
Right, exactly. And so then it's always that group right below the group that has power that's sort of waiting because, the next step is obviously going to be X. And they're like, all right, let's do it. But once you get it, right, that seat at the table is like, okay, now we need to close ranks.
Right,
because it's, okay, it's good that it's us. But hey, there's a limit here. Right.
Right.
Well, so then set us up. And if we got like 1830-ish.
Yeah. So,
right?
So Jackson's second term was 1832, right? He was elected 1828, 1832. Interestingly, I don't know if this is the right pivot here, but 1832, it was Jackson's people that were now the victim of some political shenanigans. And the newly formed Whig Party, the Whig Party was formed specifically as a party against Jackson, because Jackson had gone off and formed the Democratic Party. So they formed a party that was basically an anti-Jackson party in the Whig Party. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to challenge Jackson on the national bank. Back then we had a national bank. It covered currency and interest rates and cash flow and things like that. It did what the Federal Reserve does today, basically.
Except it was actually chartered, right? By
Yes,
the
it was
US
chartered,
as
and it
opposed-
was political.
Right.
It was political. It was absolutely political. And Jackson hated it and always was opposed to the bank. He believed that the Western farmers were all hurt by the bank specifically. So they were going to bring up a bill to recharter the bank, make another version of it, extend it into the future, basically. And they knew that he would veto it. And what they hoped is that they could get an override of his veto, which would embarrass him in an election year and a re-election year, and they could show he's not fit. Well, he vetoed it, and they were unable to override his veto. And then Jackson went about dismantling the bank in anger because of what they had done. He was disgusted with Nicholas Biddle, who was the bank president. He was mad at Henry Clay, who had orchestrated some of this, and he started to pull out federal deposits from the bank, shove them to the state banks, and he made it so that land payments, which we were in a land crisis already, so he made it so that land payments had to be done in silver, and none of the cheap money out in the West where people were buying land. There was no silver.
Right.
And people were defaulting on loans, and the economy spiraling.
I think we'll go back to history repeating itself.
Right.
I mean, that
Right.
seems like American 1920s,
Right.
right? I mean, stock market, all that. I mean, farmers are the ones who
Right.
always sort of fall first.
Yeah.
Right.
And we have some farmers in trouble right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, same kind of thing.
But,
Right.
it's about a 90-year window. So if you did listen to our episode last time, you might
Well,
find some similarities.
So
Yeah.
you're in the 30s, and in Europe in the 30s we have a revolution.
We do.
Revolutions.
Yeah, we have a couple of them.
And they're more for people's rights, individual rights. And then we hit the 1848 revolutions that are a little bit more socialist in nature.
Yeah, in an ironic way. I mean, I think the 1830 revolutions, if you're talking about like this common man, right, or this pushback against, are we for or against? At the end of, remember, like those revolutions in 1830 in France and in Belgium and Greece, and
Mhm.
what they end up doing, remember, is to quell any kind of revolution, you give them sort of an independent state, right? You create a Belgium, so Belgians have this sense of nationalism.
Right.
They get what they want, right, which is an identity and a constitutional monarchy, but we're going to put, right, a monarch or a noble from someplace else in charge. So, the Greeks get a new king, the Belgians get a new king, who eventually son will marry the Queen of England, and
Right.
ironically, the family that is, that given Greece is great, 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 all the way down. I'm sure marries Queen Elizabeth II, right? He's an heir
Right.
to that throne, which no longer exists. But
Right.
yeah, so you give them what they want within reason. Right, which is just going to make them angry, which is going to lead 18 years later to,
yeah.
right.
You're right.
Right. So do we ever, I mean, like, is there any kind of common thread there in the U.S.? Like, are there protests? Are there people rise up against things like the tariff or
maybe
unfair?
not quite to that level, but I was sitting there while you guys were talking, and I was thinking about, again, that last episode we did on the history repeating itself, and that there's always a transition from new, fresh, great ideas to sort of a little bit of turmoil, and then eventually some reform, and things go haywire. And we're approaching the Civil War with all this, and that what it makes me think of right away was that in the post Andrew Jackson era, the spirit of individualism and everybody gets to participate continued, and it grew beyond anything that Jackson would be comfortable with, but it grew into like abolitionism. There was a growing and pretty vocal anti-slavery movement. There was feminism. It was 1848 is kind of the birth of American feminism with Seneca Falls, Declaration of Sentiments, and all that. And they were using a lot of the same language that had come out of the 1830s at that point in time. And so there's all this a lot of upheaval way.
That would count.
But you're setting the table for what happens before the Civil War, where it all breaks down.
Right.
Where it all breaks down.
I think also, I always remember telling people, like, when they think about Les Mis or any of those, right? Les Mis is the 1830 French Revolution, right? It's not the first one. It's it's a post, there's an emerging middle class, right? And now they want to sit at the table. They've got laissez-faire economics, and the market works for some, it doesn't work for all. But so the gap, right, between rich and poor, or power and no power, keeps growing, and that's really what sort of fuels this undercurrent.
And what we're talking about is what we talked about last episode. right? These are the seasons that we're
Right.
talking about.
Totally.
Right.
Right. And how we're leading into the next winter, which is, a drastic season of war and upheaval.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it works. Like we're kind of charging into the Civil War in America. I don't know what that would look like in Europe. What would you say is that cataclysmic thing? Is there a European?
I think the 1848 revolutions are
Big.
pretty,
They're pretty big.
pretty big. But you've also got, and we'll talk about this.
Well, you've got in 1870, you've got unification of Italy and Germany, which is a whole nother
Earth shaking.
Yeah,
Right,
you've got Otto von Bismarck in Germany, who is actually fighting Napoleon III,
Right.
and and you've got Cavour and different folks down in Italy who are pulling strings and doing different things to try to unify those countries. And everybody thinks those countries have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they've both just been around since 1870.
Yeah,
I think in Europe, 1848, and there's a whole separate episode clearly, but 1848 represents sort of the triumph. I think you used the word like socialism, right? Where it's a revolution from below, right? Clearly, the system isn't working,
right?
And so nearly every country on the mainland in Europe, right, has some massive upheaval, right? Where the people down here who have a seat at the table, well-to-do middle-class students and people are like, if in for an inch, in for a yard, and so they keep pushing. And it was, England's the only one who doesn't have that really,
right?
Because they've given their workers at least a sense of rights, right? They've given some people the right to vote, and the promise is maybe more. They've cleaned up the cities a little bit.
They're not working 7 days a week.
A little bit more safety measures.
Kids are not working in the coal mines.
Absolutely perfect. Yeah. So there's at least this sense that the British government is responding.
And if you think about that, now we've got to have public schools or somewhere to put the kids, right? So you got a birth of other things.
And sports and all that. Yeah. But Russia's the only other country that, and we talked about this with Napoleon, the only other country that doesn't have a revolution. And that's because, I apologize.
We got dogs in the house.
We got dogs in the house, right? Dogs in the studio. It's bring your pet to work day. But Russia's the only one that doesn't experience revolution. Britain on the one side because their government has responded. Russia on the other side because it's still an autocratic, system where they're not going to allow it. But everybody else in the middle is trapped.
But theirs is coming. Russia's is coming.
Asterisk next to that.
Right.
So I don't know. It's not. I don't think it's quite a civil war.
No, I would agree. I would agree. We've got the Civil War getting ready to start in the United States. We've got some revolutions in the 30s and 40s in Europe, and we've got the culmination of work of several different leaders in 2 different pretty major countries that are going to affect the world greatly. In Italy and Germany. So maybe it's time for Mr. Breedlove to tell us who he'd have a drink with.
Hey, I want to know.
Oh, I should probably have well, I'm going to go easy on this one. All the names that you kept throwing out, right? Of kept firing little bells like John Quincy Adams and John C. Calhoun and all that, right? And instead of picking, I think, the obvious Andrew Jackson, I think I would pick someone like a Calhoun or a Van Buren. Right? I think I'd pick one of the anti-Jacksonian powers that be, and actually, there's clearly somebody.
I'd say your dogs. I'd say they agree with you.
I think we're being invaded.
No, I think I would pick maybe somebody on the anti-Jackson side, and really kind of grill them on this dichotomy, right? Like, here's a man who clearly did some amazing things in terms of setting the tone and the pace and set up a whole nother, idea of what America was going to be like. But he was on the other side, some of the acts and things that he did, right? Which is why I think even recently you've kind of got this anti-Jackson resurgence of taking off the $20 bill, right? You can't be lionizing this guy. So I think I'd like to talk to someone who was alive at the time and are we giving this guy a fair shake, or is that because history has gone back, or at the time, did people hate him? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. But the majority of people didn't hate him. But the people that he was so polarizing, you literally think about a guy who created a political party because he was kind of mad at the establishment. And then the establishment grew so annoyed with him that rapidly they created a the Whig Party was literally an anti-Jackson party. The Whig Party makes no sense. There were Northerners, Southerners, Westerners. I mean, I even sometimes joke about this Southern anti-Jackson faction, right? Like there's this, if you hated Jackson, come on in, you're part of our party. They had
It's
no
a very short platform.
they,
Right.
well, they really couldn't have much of a platform because they didn't agree on things except we don't like him and he's acting like a king.
Well, so
Right.
that would be the question I think I would ask somebody is, he was so polarizing, but it's probably the first time you have such a polarizing figure post-revolution.
That way, yes.
That way, I think you'd be like, do we realize that he's like, I know he's polarized, but do you get what this is going to lead to? Like now that 150 years later, like it surely happens again and again and again. And I just wonder, he's like the first.
There are, I don't want to necessarily make it sound like we're saying the current situation is a Jacksonian situation. We've had a few of them over the years. There's plenty of them, but there are qualities in presidents who demand power. You can trace that back to Jackson. There are presidents who want to use power and feel as if they, Nixon famously said, right?
What I was going to say.
If the president does it, it's not illegal.
Right.
That's so Jacksonian. That's so Jacksonian.
That's crazy.
And to think that that's okay.
Right.
That hey, I can that's absolutism at its finest, king-esque, if you will.
Yeah. And I think the second question I would ask that in that same vein then is like, this is a new country. I mean, we've only been 35, 40 years, well, maybe 50 years by this time into it. Are they freaked out that this is the end of an American state? I mean, we kind of fought against this kind of unitary executive, and yet here's a guy who's exercising that, and people love him for it, right? I mean, I think that's
with
the question.
Are you with the Whigs or the Democrats?
Right,
because the Whigs felt that way.
So would people have thought Jackson was in his rhetoric polarizing, dividing?
Yeah, to an extent. I think there were people who felt like Jackson understood them. We're his people. This is what America should be. It should be for the common man.
But was it his policy that made people hate him or dislike him, or was it his rhetoric?
Oh, you mean on the other side?
That's what I'm asking. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I think it was the way he wielded his power.
Okay.
I mean, the most common criticism you'll see from people on the side of the Whigs was that Andrew Jackson. There's a famous cartoon. You can Google it. Look it up. It's King Andrew the First. And it's a cartoon that they drew. It's Andrew Jackson in regalia of a king, and he's holding the scepter, and he's stepping on the Constitution, and he's doing all. So they were literally saying, "You are ruining our government, acting like a king."
Which is my question, right? They're clearly aware that
this
is not the way they wanted it to go. That'd be a little scary.
Oh, for sure.
Close to the revolution.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and the War of 1812, where you could have lost your country again, and now you're talking 38 years, if I'm doing my math right.
Yeah.
And you're in a civil war. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And so much of this was a dress rehearsal for the Civil War.
Right.
In a way.
Right.
Like that tariff issue. Not to, sorry, I don't want to do this. I promise this was quick. But that tariff issue, the states were rebelling and threatening to nullify the federal tariff sort of as a test ground. If we can nullify the tariff, which we don't like, if they ever try to abolish slavery, we might be able to nullify that federal law. There was a sense that we're testing the grounds of states' rights versus federal power there too.
Interesting.
So
kind of to recap.
Yeah, to wrap it up.
So kind of recap, we've talked about the War of 1812 and how that kind of symbolized what was going on with Napoleon in Europe, and how nationalism is on the rise. U.S. nationalism and defeating Britain the second time. Countries having nationalistic feelings because they got rid of Napoleon, and now they're their own country again, bringing back leaders that were leaders in the past in Europe, liberal ideas. But and I think in our country right now, we like to liberal, conservative, and we make it such, but liberal ideas, classically liberal, where you're talking about laissez-faire government, hands off. Right, you're talking about more rights for people, including voting rights,
power of the individual over
the common man that we heard a lot about with Jackson here, and the idea that Jackson was polarizing because he lost an election, went on a national campaign, got a whole lot of support, created his own party, And then by the end of everything, Jackson is now got a third party created, if you will, the Whig Party, that is developed just to defeat him. Jackson's controversy is both positive and negative because there were things he did that people really liked, and the championing of the common man, but he was king-like at times, and they didn't like that, and that's all going to lead us into the Civil War.
And then I think a couple of things you mentioned, like the liberalism and the ideas in Europe, are going to clearly set us up for what's coming, right?
Yeah.
In terms of unification, and then slide right into World War
World
One.
Wars, yep.
Right. So
Yep,
I mean,
yep.
I think we've kind of done a good job of summarizing.
Well, so we don't
stuff.
know yet. Yeah, it's what we're going to talk about next time.
Yeah.
But we've got lots of ideas now.
So here's the thing. This was such a big, broad area. There's a lot of topics within this we could talk about, but obviously we have the Civil War getting ready to set up. Tell us what you want.
Yeah, what do you want to hear
Tell
about?
us
We
what you
would
want.
love to hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Drop some
And like us and share us and hit all of our socials.
do
and
all that stuff.
do all
you
those
young
things.
kids
Do all the things you're
That's
supposed
right.
to do in terms
But,
of like social media. I think that's a great way to wrap it up. I love the appeal to the masses.
yeah. To the
common man.
To the
What
common-
you want to hear your voice.
That's right. Well, I guess, guys, class dismissed.
Class dismissed.
Thanks for joining us.
I almost poured some more.